All right, so we're going to show this. You can still see the spreadsheet?
Yep.
Okay. So, Chief, you want to talk a little bit about how you would go about getting this kind of data, the different forms that it comes into a department for officer complaints?
Yeah, so basically, police departments typically will use an RMS, or maybe they use something like a Guardian tracker or some sort of format where they're just monitoring complaints that are coming in. And so it's pretty much going to be some basic forms that they're going to fill out, a checklist, check boxes, and then there's some level of free form where there is, a quick description of the complaint, narrative of the complaint, or whatever the concern is. And so regardless what police department you have or where things are, what system you have, every police department probably has something like that, or a majority of the police departments do, or maybe they just use an Excel spreadsheet itself. But the problem is actually analyzing that data. We can go through and say we got 50 officer rudeness complaints, or maybe we got a racially biased complaint, but we really don't have the ability to go through and ask a more drilled down questions and understand. You might know that Officer Jones had 20 complaints or 10 complaints throughout the year, but what you won't know is what's the common theme? What do we need to do? What do we need to train on? We're trying to extrapolate from basic information that we already have in our existing system. And so what we want to show you here is how you actually can analyze your own data without needing a data analyst, using AI as fast as possible, so this doesn't become such a cumbersome lift. And then you can start looking at, how do I train my staff differently, and go from there. So go ahead, Dave.
Okay, so a couple of tricks on using Copilot in Excel. So the data must be saved in OneDrive, right? So if you have M365, you have OneDrive, that's where everything's being saved. Autosave must be turned on, and the data must be in a table format, meaning that you have highlighted all the cells and rows of the area that you're going to use. And pro tip, don't just grab the A, B, C, D and do it, because it'll take like 100,000 rows and create a table, and then it will have a problem because the data is so large. So just highlight all the data that cells that you actually have data in, and then go to insert table, hit table, and the way you'll know you have a table is that you get these drop downs to where you could actually filter the different data. So from that setup, now we can go to the Home tab, and we can do a couple of things here. One, just out of the box, you can analyze data with Excel now inside Copilot, where it'll do auto analysis. So it's just looking at the data and it's pulling out things that are kind of common, right? So these are essentially pivot tables. So there's this officer here, Officer Charles Lowe. Again, all this is fictitious data, 100% made up, even the town. And I could insert this pivot chart. It automatically inserts it on a new table. So you can see now, if I'm wanting to know what's going on with Officer Lowe, and it pulled him out because he happens to have the most. So 50 officers on the force. There's 1,000 rows. I know it's a little over the top, but trying to show how to do data analysis. All the dates and the number of complaints, and this outlier here showing that on 2 particular days, he had 2 complaints, meaning more than one in a single day. So maybe what was going on that day, was he having a bad day, etc. So this is just out of the box analysis that it just does by clicking on the Analyze badge, right? So badge 8763 appears the most often. We'll probably go back and we'll find out that that happens to be Officer Charles Lowe's badge number. So go back to the table. And then the other thing that I notice here is I've got this narrative. I've got name, badge number, the date of the occurrence, and then this narrative in the complaint. But what I don't have is something that tells me at a high level, what's the category of that complaint? Is he disrespectful? Did he use bad language? Did they stop unnecessarily? Was there racism involved? Yada, yada, whatever different categories you could think of. And that's a complex thing to write in Excel to try to get that done, or to go through by hand and try to categorize things. So if you had a standard of categorization, you could use that, or you could just ask Copilot to help you with it. So bear with me while I type in a prompt here, and I'll just ask.
Well, while you're working on that prompt, one of the things that I forgot to tell you is, when you're trying to extrapolate that data. I don't know whether you have Central Square, or maybe you even use Spillman or some sort of RMS as well, that you're pulling that information. You can typically export to a JSON file. And if you do that, that'll throw you into Excel. You can open that JSON file with Excel. And then what David was talking about with opening up and making that your table, you'll be able to put in those table parameters so that you're able to use Copilot, which, as he showed you, takes a couple of clicks of the button, but you really need to make sure that you make that table, otherwise you won't get there. Okay, sorry, Dave, go ahead with your command prompt.
Oh yeah, no problem. So the prompt said, I need categories for these complaints. Please help me with a formula to create a category list. So natural language, I didn't have to say, use this, use that. I'm just asking a question. I don't need to be a data scientist. I don't need to be an expert in writing formulas in Excel, which many people become an expert out of necessity, but it's hard, right? Especially when you get into these kind of more complex ones. So this has broke down into several categories where I could insert this column directly into the column, or I could copy and paste the formula and let it run. But since it's already done that for me, I can just say insert the column, and now you'll see it's broken it down into several categories. And like I said, you could be more specific if you wanted more categories, but it looks like professionalism, arrest, other, profiling, language, etc. And then the other thing I would want to do real quick, if it hadn't done it already, is change it. And it looks like it changed the title as well to category. So now, because I have category included, I've got a more finite set of information to start to do analysis on.
And
Chief,
one thing about
that?
Well, yeah. One other part about this that's really valuable is, let's say you do have maybe like a Guardian tracker software where you are putting in the category of the complaint, but you want to cross-pollinate the words to the categories to make sure that you're actually categorizing properly. This is a great way to double check your work. Find out, are we actually entering use of force properly? Are we entering this as just officer complaint or officer rudeness when it was a use of force, or when it was some other type of issue? And so this is a great check and balance that you could do that. The other part of that is let's say you're not able to categorize because you're using your RMS system, and so you're just calling it an internal affairs investigation or just officer complaint, and you're putting it, cloaking it out so that the rest of the staff can't see it. This is a great way to come back and now do something with your data and actually have those categories so people know what it is, and you can provide this in a great analysis to your staff and really give direction as far as what we need to work on, what we need to train on, what are our true issues. You can find them.
Yeah, so I wrote a prompt in here that just said, who are the top 5 officers for complaints from a count and category, right? So not total, but based on particular counts and categories. And it's kicked me out a list. It's actually gone a little beyond 5. But I'll add that to a new sheet, and let's just look at it real quick. So it's just saying that these, 7 officers, and that's why it gave me more than 5, is there's several that have the same exact count, but they're have categories of other, so from 14 to 11. So it's at least telling me that there's some officers that have repeat complaints. And I could go back and ask other questions, right? And I'll do one more, and then we'll jump to a little different mechanism for doing this.
Yeah, because as you can see that, you're like, oh, great, all of my cops have the complaints under the other category. So what's the other? What's the problem we're not addressing that we thought is the problem we should be looking at? It's not use of force, it's not language. What is the other issue that we want to deal with? So this gives you that valuable insight where all of a sudden you're like, great, we got all this information, but now we don't know where other is.
So I've wrote in here, and I even misspelled it, and it does a good job of getting past misspellings and understanding intent. But what complaints span across more than 30 individual officers? And my prompt may not be the best prompt. It may need to be written a little differently. So it says there are no matches. So there are any systemic complaints.
And one of the things I want to say,
a large number. Go ahead.
Well, Dave brought up that, across this is using a department of 50 officers. We know that, 9,000 or better agencies have way less than 50 officers. And sometimes there's the tendency or the complaints or the allegations within the smaller agencies that the chief just kind of picks on people. If you use a methodical system like this, you're able to actually put numbers to your system. This is going to give you a lot of value when it comes to allegations, lawsuits, etc. Because now you're going to be able to say, no, we don't just say, yeah, well, we have 10 officers and we know that, Jones gets the most complaints because he does, but you can still put all of this in a numerical rubric and you're able to really talk about what's going on intelligently instead of, well, we just know because he gets the most complaints out of anybody in the department. This makes that a fairer process and more transparent. And, getting back to that officer wellness and recruitment retention, that this is valuable for your staff to be able to see that there's some level of stability in the department, that they know it's not just the chief's opinion.
Yeah, and so I tried again and said, are there any systemic complaints across a large number of officers? And again, sometimes it's a little bit of trial and error in the interpretation of what your natural language is in your prompt and how the system is then taking that and translating it into a statistical analysis of the data that you have. And so the way it interpreted it was that I was looking for officers that had greater than one, and it's provided me that information I could put on it. That's not what I was looking for. I was more looking for trying to distinguish between where I have individual officers that may need some additional attention, right? Maybe they need retraining. Maybe they're having some sort of issue that's causing them to have more and more complaints, and I'd like to intervene before it becomes a larger problem. Or I was more looking for, do I have systemic issues that may point to where I have a training deficit across my entire force or a policy that needs to be reiterated? For instance, maybe everybody in the department or a large number are getting complaints for being unprofessional or using poor language. And maybe it's time to pull everyone in or send out a memo that says, hey, just to remind you, be courteous, don't use bad language, et cetera, if that's in line with your organizational policies. So I'm going to stop this recording